Imagine being enslaved. Now imagine not just escaping, but defeating three of the world's most powerful empires and building your own nation from the ashes. Sounds impossible, right? That's exactly what happened in Haiti. It's a story most history books avoid because it forces a terrifying question. What happens when the enslaved don't just rise up, but win? One man would lead this revolution. He was not a general, not a nobleman. He was a coachman who taught himself to read at nearly 50. A man who studied war from books by candlelight and outmaneuvered armies trained in European capitals. He wasn't supposed to matter. And yet, he would become the architect of the only successful slave revolt in human history. This isn't just a story about rebellion. It's a story about power, betrayal, strategy, supernatural belief, and a revolution so successful, it terrified the world's most powerful governments into silence. The Haitian Revolution wasn't supposed to happen, and the world has never fully recovered from the shock of what it proved was possible. In 1791, the western third of the island of Hispaniola was called Saint-Domingue. Today, we call it Haiti. At that time, it was the single richest colony on Earth. Just that one colony produced 40% of all the sugar and 60% of all the coffee consumed in Europe. It fueled French wealth, French elegance, French empire. And it was powered by over 500,000 enslaved Africans who worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, in blistering heat. The mortality rate was so high, life expectancy after arrival was only 7 years. 7. That's how cheap life was in Saint-Domingue. So cheap that French plantation owners found it more profitable to work people to death and simply import more than allow enslaved people to live long enough to have children. It was an industrial system of death disguised as agriculture. But in the shadows of that brutality, something ancient stirred. The enslaved communicated through rhythms, drums passed down from West Africa. They practiced Vodou, a religion that fused African traditions with Catholicism, one the French couldn't understand and couldn't destroy. Resistance was always there, quiet, coded, spiritual. And then it exploded. On the night of August 14th, 1791, deep in the northern mountains of Saint-Domingue, a group of enslaved leaders gathered at a place called Bois Caïman. By torchlight, with drums beating and the air thick with tension, a Vodou priestess named Cécile Fatimon led a ceremony. A black pig was sacrificed. Blood was shared. Oaths were sworn. The enslaved vowed to rise up as one and burn the colony to the ground. 1 week later, the sky turned red. Over 1,000 plantations were engulfed in flames in a single night. Sugar fields, once white with cane, were black with ash. French colonists, armed and panicked, fled toward the cities. And for the first time, the richest colony on Earth had become the site of the largest slave uprising in human history. But uprisings had happened before. All of them had been crushed. To succeed, this one needed something more, someone more. A leader who could think 10 steps ahead of the enemy. That man was Toussaint. Toussaint Breda was born around 1743, enslaved on the Breda plantation. But even as a child, there was something different about him. His godfather, Pierre Baptiste, was an educated African who passed on knowledge of medicine, literacy, and African spirituality. A Catholic priest later helped teach Toussaint to read Latin and French. And even while working as a coachman on the plantation, Toussaint studied military strategy, devouring texts by Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, and Machiavelli. He was preparing for a war nobody else could yet see. When the French Revolution broke out in 1789, the Declaration of the Rights of Man declared liberty and equality, but never mentioned slavery. In Saint-Domingue, free men of color demanded equal rights from white colonists. The response was brutal. In 1790, a free man of color named Vincent Augué led a small revolt. The French tortured him to death, breaking every bone in his body in public. Toussaint watched and learned. When the revolt began in 1791, Toussaint made a curious decision. First, he helped his own master's family escape safely. Not out of loyalty, but out of strategy. He understood that mercy could be political. Then, he joined the rebellion, not as a soldier, but as a doctor, using his knowledge of herbal medicine to heal the wounded. And while others fought, he watched. He learned from their mistakes. And then he took command. Within months, he was leading troops. Within a year, he commanded thousands. He trained them with European precision, but fought with guerrilla creativity. He became legendary for outmaneuvering larger armies. And he chose a new name, Toussaint Louverture. Louverture, meaning the opening, because he always found an opening in the enemy's defenses. But this was only the beginning. By 1793, Saint-Domingue wasn't just at war with itself. Spain invaded from the east. Britain sent 20,000 troops from Jamaica. France's own revolution had turned chaotic and bloody. And amid that chaos, Toussaint played the empires against each other. He first aligned with Spain, who promised him weapons, rank, and support. For a year, he fought against the French, seizing territory. But then, in 1794, the French abolished slavery in all their colonies. That was the moment Toussaint had waited for. He switched sides, taking 4,000 trained troops with him, and rejoined the French Republic. The Spanish never saw it coming. Toussaint crushed them, pushing them out of the West. Then came the British. They saw an opportunity to seize the colony and reimpose slavery. They sent wave after wave of troops. And Toussaint destroyed them, not just with bullets, but with terrain, tactics, and disease. His forces moved through swamps and mountains the British wouldn't dare enter. They struck at night, poisoned water supplies, beat drums through the jungle to keep enemies awake and afraid. And then, yellow fever swept in. The British had no immunity. Entire regiments were wiped out. By 1798, the British had lost 100,000 men, half from combat, half from disease. They withdrew, and they didn't negotiate with France. They negotiated directly with Toussaint, a former slave, now treated as a head of state. By 1801, he controlled the entire island. But he wasn't just a military genius, he was a builder. He issued a constitution, abolished slavery permanently, and declared himself governor-general for life. He rebuilt plantations, not with slave labor, but with paid workers under strict conditions. He reopened trade with the U.S. and Britain. Sugar and coffee production began to rise again. Schools opened. The colony began to stabilize. But there was tension. His labor policies still required people to work the land, sometimes by force. There was no more chattel slavery, but freedom was not yet full. And then came the most dangerous enemy of all, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon had plans. He wanted to rebuild a French empire in the Americas. But he needed Saint-Domingue back, and he needed slavery reinstated. In 1801, he sent the largest transatlantic expedition in European history. 86 ships, 40,000 troops, led by his brother-in-law, General Leclerc. Toussaint was tired. He was nearly 60. He'd been fighting for over a decade. Still, his forces resisted fiercely. But Leclerc was cunning. He offered Toussaint's generals money, titles, power. Many accepted. Believing Napoleon's lies, they thought slavery would remain abolished. It was a trap. Toussaint negotiated peace. Leclerc promised safety, promised he could retire, promised the revolution was over. Then, in the dead of night, French troops stormed Toussaint's home, arrested him, and shipped him to a frozen prison in the mountains of France. No trial, no appeal. He died there in 1803, alone, starved, and shivering. But before he died, he said something that would echo through time. "You have felled the tree of liberty, but the roots are deep and they will grow again." And they did. After Toussaint Louverture was taken, Napoleon believed the revolution was over, that the roots Toussaint had planted would wither without him. He was wrong, because Toussaint wasn't the revolution. He was the spark. But the fire had already spread. Just months after his arrest, word reached Saint-Domingue. Napoleon had reinstated slavery in Guadeloupe. French ships arrived with new orders. In Saint-Domingue, the same was about to happen. The promises Leclerc had made were lies. And suddenly, the generals who had once betrayed Toussaint realized they had been betrayed too. One by one, they returned to the fight. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Henri Christophe, Alexander Pétion. The core of the revolutionary army reassembled, but this time, with no illusions. They weren't fighting to negotiate, not to reform, not to coexist. They were fighting for total independence. The revolution's second act was far more brutal. Dessalines led scorched earth campaigns. No longer bound by Toussaint's vision of reconciliation, he ordered that no French soldier be shown mercy. Independence or death wasn't a slogan, it was a strategy. The French, weakened by yellow fever and demoralized by constant ambushes, collapsed under the weight of their losses. By late 1803, they had lost another 50,000 men. And at the Battle of Verdières in November, one of the final clashes of the revolution, Dessalines crushed the last major French force. Napoleon's dream of an empire in the Americas was shattered. On January 1, 1804, in the city of Gonâves, Dessalines stood before the people of Saint-Domingue and declared a new nation. He called it Haiti, restoring the original Taino name for the land, long before colonizers ever arrived. And just like that, the unthinkable became reality. Haiti became the first independent Black republic in the world, the first country ever founded by formerly enslaved people, and only the second independent nation in the Western Hemisphere after the United States. But the world was not ready to welcome Haiti. France refused to recognize its independence. The United States, still a slaveholding nation, saw Haiti as a threat, proof that rebellion could succeed. European powers feared the idea would spread, so they isolated Haiti, economically, politically, diplomatically. And in 1825, 21 years after independence, France came back. But not with guns, with debt. They demanded that Haiti pay reparations, not to the formerly enslaved, but to the former slave owners. Compensation for lost property, which included the people France once enslaved. The price? 150 million gold francs, roughly $21 billion in today's money. To avoid another invasion, Haiti agreed. They took out loans from French banks, with interest. It took them 122 years to pay it off. Not until 1947 was the final payment made. Let that sink in. The people who were once enslaved paid their enslavers for the freedom they had already won in blood. And they paid until the mid-20th century. That economic stranglehold left Haiti in permanent debt, unable to invest in infrastructure, healthcare, or education. Generations were born into a nation deliberately starved of resources, not by chance, but by design. And still, Haiti endured. It has been battered by natural disasters, foreign interference, political instability. But what can never be erased is what it proved to the world. It proved that the chains of slavery could be broken, not just by philosophy, not by law, but by action, by fire, by blood, by strategy. It proved that the oppressed could not only rise up, but win. That's why the Haitian Revolution is still feared, still buried, still whispered. Because if it happened once, it can happen again. And that is why this story matters. Not just for Haitians, not just for historians, but for every society built on inequality. Because systems of exploitation will always tell you they are permanent, until someone proves they're not. In the decades that followed Haiti's independence, the ripple effects of the revolution reached far beyond the Caribbean. Across the American South, slaveholders tightened their grip. They passed harsher laws. They banned gatherings, prohibited literacy, and crushed any sign of resistance. Why? Because Haiti haunted them. Enslaved people in Georgia, Virginia, and the Carolinas whispered about the Black Republic that had defied the greatest armies on earth. They heard stories of Toussaint and Dessalines, not as men, but as legends. Proof that liberation wasn't a dream. It was a blueprint. In 1811, just 7 years after Haiti's independence, Charles Dessalines led one of the largest slave revolts in U.S. history in Louisiana. He was Haitian. Rebellions spread across the hemisphere. In Jamaica, in Cuba, in Brazil. Everywhere that chains still clinked in the dark, Haiti's victory became both a warning and a prophecy. And for the global elite, Haiti was a contagion. Western nations refused to trade fairly with it. They treated Haiti not as a state, but a mistake, one they intended never to repeat. This isolation wasn't accidental. It was punishment. A new kind of colonialism began, one without flags, without armies, but just as effective. Economic warfare, trade blockades, weaponized debt. The tools changed. The objective didn't. To break the will of a free black nation. Even now, in the 21st century, the effects remain. In 2010, after a devastating earthquake killed over 200,000 people, the world pledged billions in aid. But much of that money was never delivered. Or worse, channeled through foreign contractors and NGOs who built little, helped few, and left behind resentment. In 2021, Haiti's president was assassinated under mysterious circumstances. Armed mercenaries, foreign operatives, and no clear answers. Once again, Haiti became a pawn on a global chessboard it didn't ask to play on. And yet, despite everything, Haiti remains unbroken. Because this isn't just a story of tragedy. It's a story of resistance. The kind that refuses to die. That lives in language. In rhythm. In memory. In drums still played in the mountains. In names still whispered at shrines. In the black and red of Haiti's revolutionary flag. In the pride of a people who were never meant to survive, and yet did. Because the world thought they could erase Haiti's history. But history has roots. And Haiti's roots go deep. They grew through blood-soaked soil. Through betrayal. Through betrayal again. Through the weight of empires, of lies, of centuries of extraction. And still they grow. Today, if you ask the average person about revolutions, they might name the American Revolution or the French Revolution, both celebrated, romanticized, etched into schoolbooks and monuments. But the Haitian Revolution? It's often left out, or barely mentioned. And when it is, it's usually stripped of its complexity, its brilliance, and its fearsome implications. Why? Because the Haitian Revolution shattered the lie that colonial powers had used to justify centuries of domination, that enslaved people were passive, that they needed to be civilized, that freedom was something to be granted, not taken. Haiti flipped that script. The enslaved in Saint-Domingue didn't wait for emancipation. They made it happen. They didn't beg for humanity. They declared it, fought for it, bled for it, and won. But victory came at a price the world would never stop charging them for. By the 1820s, France demanded its reparations, and Haiti paid. In gold. For decades. Draining the young nation of its resources, stifling its economy before it could ever grow. No other nation in history had to pay for its freedom like this. By the 20th century, the United States occupied Haiti for 19 years. From 1915 to 1934, U.S. Marines controlled the country's treasury, rewrote its constitution, and handed over land rights to American companies. They disbanded the Haitian army, crushed protests, and installed puppet leaders. Haiti had thrown off European chains, only to be shackled by new powers wearing different flags. And yet, in the face of it all, Haitians never stopped resisting, never stopped creating, never stopped believing that their story wasn't just about pain. It was about power, about identity, about survival. Their art, their music, their literature, their faith, all of it became weapons of cultural resistance. Through Vodou, they preserved their African roots. Through oral storytelling, they passed down histories that the colonizers tried to erase. Through education, they built institutions in the face of starvation and sabotage. Even when the world ignored them, they remembered who they were. And now, you do too. This isn't just about Haiti. This is about how power operates, how narratives are controlled, how victories are buried, how the oppressed are demonized when they dare to rise. This is the story of the first Black republic in the world, a country born not from diplomacy or inheritance, but from fire and blood, from vision and sacrifice, from the impossible made real. And its legacy lives on in every movement for justice, in every voice that rises against tyranny, in every people who say, "We will no longer be ruled." The question isn't whether Haiti's revolution mattered. The question is, why did they try so hard to make you forget? After Haiti declared independence in 1804, the world didn't cheer. It recoiled. This new nation, built by the formerly enslaved, wasn't welcomed into the family of nations. It was quarantined, treated like a virus that might spread. A free Black republic in the Americas was a threat to every slave-owning society, and they knew it. The United States, still clinging to its own brutal system of slavery, refused to acknowledge Haiti's independence for nearly 60 years. Not until 1862, during the Civil War, when Southern slave states began seceding and the old order started to collapse. That's how dangerous Haiti's example was. Not just politically, psychologically. Because if the enslaved could rise up once, they could rise again. And not just in Haiti, in the American South, in Brazil, in Cuba, in every plantation society that had built its wealth on backs and blood. So, the response was isolation, economic strangulation, diplomatic erasure. And Haiti, victorious but wounded, was forced to carry on in the shadow of its own achievement, punished for its audacity to exist. But here's the part history rarely tells you. Even while Haiti was being ignored by Western powers, it was becoming a beacon of hope for others. Simón Bolívar, the great liberator of South America, turned to Haiti for help in his war against Spanish rule. Haiti gave him ships, soldiers, weapons, and in return, Haiti asked for just one thing: that Bolívar abolish slavery wherever he won. That's the legacy Haiti wanted to leave. Not just freedom for itself, but freedom for others. It was the first country to outlaw slavery permanently, the first to declare that race could not determine rights, the first to prove, with action, not words, that all humans are born free. And yet, the world chose not to follow. Instead, it watched as Haiti paid, again and again, for its revolution. France's ransom gutted the economy. Generations of debt crippled schools, roads, healthcare. International banks refused loans without punishing conditions. Western nations exploited Haiti's vulnerability while blaming it for its own poverty. It's a cycle designed to erase the revolution by crushing the country that dared to fight. But despite it all, Haiti never lost its memory, or its will. The descendants of Louverture, Dessalines, Christophe, Pétion, they remember. The children in schools built with too little remember. The artists, the teachers, the farmers, the workers, still resisting, still building. They remember. And now, so do you. If you made it this far, take a second. Breathe. Because what you just heard wasn't just history. It was something far more dangerous. It was truth. The kind of truth that was buried beneath silence. The kind that was ripped from textbooks, dismissed in classrooms, and replaced with myths about civilization, progress, and European glory. But when you learn about Haiti, the real Haiti, you start to see how carefully the world is designed to make you forget. Forget that freedom isn't given. It's taken. Forget that power doesn't like being challenged. Forget that the people at the bottom, those stripped of name, language, land, and life, can rise up and win. And if that unsettled you, good. That means you're waking up. This channel isn't just about stories. It's about restoration. About pulling the curtain back on the myths you were told growing up. It's about telling the untold, because the untold is often the most important. The story of Toussaint Louverture, of Haiti's revolution, of empires trembling at the feet of the enslaved, it was never meant to inspire. It was meant to be erased. Because if more people knew this, if more people saw what you just saw, they'd start asking questions the world isn't ready to answer. But we're going to keep asking them. Every video on this channel is crafted to do one thing: arm you with knowledge that empowers. The stories they left out, the resistance they erased, the victories they buried. I dig them up, one by one, so you can see the bigger picture. So if you felt something, if this story moved you, opened your eyes, made you angry, made you proud, made you want to know more, don't just leave. Stay, join the community, subscribe right now. Because this isn't just about Haiti. This is about what happens when the powerless become powerful, when the world turns its back, but history refuses to stay quiet. Hit that like button if this gave you a new perspective. Leave a comment. I want to hear your thoughts, your questions, what shocked you, what inspired you. And most importantly, share this video. Send it to a friend, a student, a teacher, a skeptic, someone who still believes the world is exactly the way it looks on the surface. Because it's not, and it never was. And if you're hungry for more truth, more buried stories, more fearless explorations of what history really looked like, this channel is where it happens. New episodes every single week. See you in the next one. And remember, history doesn't just belong to the victors. It belongs to those who choose to remember.